Good morning, Cordova Church family. This is Kyle coming at you from my office live. Well, I'm alive as we're recording this on Saturday morning, and it's a weird time right now. We're not meeting, and yet I am encouraged knowing that it is through the Spirit that we have unity and togetherness. And so even if we're not in the same space, even if we're not in the same building, we are still together. And before we get started on our sermon, I want to encourage you to take advantage of all of the other ways that we can still connect with each other throughout the week. Even if we can't meet together in the building right now, there is still the Facebook page, Facebook church chat, the prayer page. One thing the young adults and I have been doing for the last few weeks already is we all join a Bible study devotional on the YouVersion Bible app. And we read through the scriptures, and sometimes we have thoughts and we share them. And so even if our small groups are not meeting right now, I would encourage you to maybe get together and pick up a devotional that you guys can do every day and stay connected like that. I also want to encourage you that we're only right now, at least, recording or hopefully next week live streaming the sermon parts. So in terms of worship and singing, I want to encourage you to post YouTube videos of your favorite songs so that others can hear them and be encouraged. You can do that on any online platform that we have. And lastly, just remind you that communion is available at the church building from 10 to 11:45. Although as you're watching this, it'll probably be like 10:30 when you're seeing this, give or take. So just want to let you know that for the coming weeks, every Sunday from 10 to about 11:45, we will have communion made available for people who want to come pick it up real quick. It's going to be weird not seeing you all, but at least you get to see me. You're welcome. So with that, let's talk about Jesus. We are going to just stay the course in terms of what we're talking about in the sermon. So we're going to stay in Titus and talk about leaders and Paul's advice and Paul's direction for Titus as he is looking for shepherds in his community. If this is your first sermon hearing that, just a real quick background. Titus is a minister on an island of Crete. Crete is a not great place to live. I'm sure it had its moments, but it was not known for being safe. It was known for treachery, for greed. Cretans were known for being liars, and so Titus has moved into this island, these cities, and he's ministering, and he is dealing with a couple of problems. Chief of those, maybe not chief, but certainly one of the top problems is a group of Christians known as the Circumcision Party have come in, and they are trying to teach Christians that they need Jesus plus for salvation, that they need to follow certain Jewish laws still in order to be saved and to be considered the people of God. And Paul says, no, that is not how that works. Jesus is enough. Faith in Jesus, Jesus' faithfulness, that's what gets us into eternity and into new creation. And so Titus is there to kind of squash this battle that's going on and to really redeem the soul of the Cretan churches. And he can't do that alone. And so Paul wants him to find shepherds and overseers to help him in that battle. So let's go to our text. It is Titus chapter 1, starting in verse 6 through 9. Paul writes, an elder must be blameless, faithful to his wife, a man whose children believe and are not open to the charge of being wild and rebellious. As God's stewards, an overseer must be blameless, not arrogant, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by healthy teachings and refute those who oppose it. Okay, so this is the second time we have seen Paul use the word blameless in this passage. At first, he started off with an elder, an overseer must be blameless, faithful to his wife. His children must not be wild and rebellious. They must be faithful. So he comes back and he says, again, an elder must be blameless. And if you want to hear more about my thoughts on that word and what Paul is getting at, I think that was a sermon from 2 weeks ago. You can find that online under our sermon archive. But what he transitions here is he gives kind of a reason for his blamelessness now. It's as a steward of God. As God's steward, he must be blameless. And the word steward is really important for our conversation today. A steward was a servant who was responsible for managing their master's property, their funds, and even sometimes their children. Their tasks were as various as the masters that they followed. Sometimes their role was to keep the property well kept, keep it clean, keep it beautiful, make it look really nice for anyone who was coming to visit, because that makes your master look good to others. It keeps him in high esteem and in honor. This is why we encourage our children to clean their rooms so that people think we're good parents. Another thing was they made sure that their accounts were thriving, not just like maintaining a status quo, but we're thriving, we're growing, we're increasing. And they were oftentimes the ones responsible for raising the children to help the master's children move from being children to being honorable, well-known adults. And so the master got a lot of praise based on the work of his stewards. And stewardship is a common imagery found to us in the New Testament as it talks about the role of a Christian. When in Corinthians, when Paul is working with the Corinthian Christians who are dividing over certain teachers and trying to say, I follow this teacher, and I'm better than you because my teacher's better than yours. He kind of squashes that division by saying, like, look, each of these teachers, they're just people working for God. They're not the master, they're the steward. And so he says, this is, I think, 1 Corinthians 4:1, this is how one should regard us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. His point there is like the truth of Jesus didn't start with each of these teachers. It didn't start with Paul, didn't start with Apollos. We are workers. We are responsible with these things that God has given us. When talking about the way Christians interact with each other, Peter uses this imagery to help each of the Christians that he's writing to understand their own place in the conversation, where he says, this is verse 10 of, I didn't write it down, but I'm pretty sure it's 1 Peter 3. If not, it's in verse 10, so just look at all the verse 10s. It says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied graces. And perhaps one of the most well-known passages about stewardship, which doesn't actually use the word, but still certainly pushes home that point, is Matthew 25, where Jesus tells what's commonly called the parable of the talents. It probably could equally be called the parable of the stewards. And so the story is really simple. There's a master, and he is going away for a time, and he has his servants, and he gives one servant 5 talents, one servant's 2 talents, and one servant's 1 talent. And he says, take care of this while I'm gone. So then he goes on his trip, and then he comes back. And he meets with his stewards, and with one steward, with 2 of the stewards, he saw an increase. They had taken what their master had given them and had caused it to thrive and caused it to become more healthy, and it had grown. And when this other steward, he buried it in the sand because he was afraid of his master. And his master was not pleased with this because it didn't thrive under his stewardship. He hoarded the talent that his master had given him. He kept it hidden instead of, the master says, you could have at least put it in a bank and then it could have accrued interest or whatever. And so kind of that idea again there is stewards are called to be responsible with the gifts that they have been given. And the reason why this matters for us in this conversation is twofold. Number one, it grounds our understanding of elders. I'm going to lean this forward a little bit. It grounds our understanding of elders in ideas of servanthood, in ideas of not so much conversations about who's got the authority, who's got the power, but rather it's about service. It's a question of giftedness. It's a conversation about how we are responsible with the gifts we have been given. That shepherds chiefly see the congregation as a gift, something to be taken care of, not just something, someone's to be taken care of, to be honored, to be healthy by the work that they do. And that is their service. It's not a position of power. It's not even about power or authority. It's about serving and about sharing love and giving love. The second reason why I think it's important to us is that throughout this series, we are using these passages to think about our own walks. That instead of saying, let's look around at people in our church and men in our church and say, like, well, who fits into this category, and use this as a litmus test, that what I think these passages really serve us well is a mirror. Is let's hold up these passages as a mirror and see what our reflection looks like. How are we doing as we're following Jesus to the degree that we were able to do that? And so for me, that question really becomes a question of, am I being responsible with the gifts God has given me? Am I stewarding well in whatever area of life I find myself in? Each of us, I was going to, in my writing, it says each of us in this room, which is currently just me, but each of us watching this, each of us at church, everyone who's a part of our community, we are a blessing. We have blessings. Life is a blessing. Life is a gift. It is beautiful. It is fun. It is energetic. Like good life is such a powerful gift to be appreciated. And at the same time, it's also a remarkably tremendous responsibility. That it is not just a gift that you have and you hoard or you bury it in the sand and you try to get all you can out of it and forget anyone else in the room and that you come across. But it's meant to be used and lived and experienced well so that it can be a blessing to others. And I think that starts with sitting in awe, right? That seeing the greatness of the life that God has given us, seeing the power of redemption and forgiveness and hope and beauty, all of those things that come from God, and sitting in awe of them. And I love that idea of the mysteries of God that Paul talked about in the Corinthian passage. There's such a marvelous mystery to this life and to redemption that we must sit in awe of it. And then when you have that proper focus, you're able to then go out and say, I don't want to hoard my blessing of life. I want to bless others with it so that their life can also be a blessing. I wrote down before all of the corona stuff had happened that Christians do not wall ourselves off or hide from the world, that we go into the world, we share and we do not hoard, so that those who are lost may be found, that those who are hungry may be filled, that those who are sick might be healed. And I know in this very weird season of life, it can be hard to know what we are supposed to do. It can be weird that we're not meeting together, but that doesn't mean that we hoard our blessings. Just because we're practicing social distancing does not mean that we must enforce social isolation, that there are still sick who they still might need help, that there are vulnerable people who still might need help. This week we identified people at our church who we think might be more vulnerable, who might end up being shut in and afraid to go outside. And we're trying to call those people, to contact them, our friends, our family, and see what we can do to help them, to maybe go run some errands for them while they're at home and we go do stuff and then bring it back to them, go grocery shopping for them, stand in line for apparently 4 hours for one thing of toilet paper. It's important, I think, to remember that yes, we absolutely must be responsible and we want to protect each other. But I'm also torn with that idea that in historical times of like epidemics, like Christians still found ways to serve, to love, to be with to be with people, helping them. And so I think that requires tremendous amounts of creativity. I'm not saying be foolish. I'm not saying be unsafe. I am saying let's find that good balance that is protecting, but also still finding a way to serve and to be loving, because we are a people who serve and who sacrifice. And I know some of us are really disappointed that we're not gathering together in person. And I think the way that my mind is helping me kind of process that sadness is to think that this is a sacrifice that I'm making to help the vulnerable stay safe, that I'm giving up something I love. I'm giving up meeting together with my friends, with my family, with all of you wonderful people. I'm giving that up. I'm choosing to let that go in the hopes that we will get a better grip on this virus situation thing, because we're servants, we're stewards. And so going back into the text, right? So going back into Titus's story, he's dealing with false teachers who are pursuing dishonest gain, who are ripping entire families apart. They are not servants. They are self-focused people. And Paul says, you must find men who can help shepherd these churches with you, who can fight these false teachers. And so from here, past verse 7, he offers lists, as he's known to do, sort of kind of, I guess, contrasting lists. And so you've got some bad, unhealthy habit, unhealthy qualities, followed by, here are the things they should be doing. Here, don't do these things, do these things. And so this week we're going to just look at the don't do these things. And then next week we'll look at the do these things in his list. That made sense. Okay. So his first don't do these things is, he says, don't be arrogant. Some translations have overbearing. I think Paul's idea here is that don't be a person who lets their impulses, their selfish impulses, get in the way of following God's commands. That this word describes people who are willing to not only do whatever they want for their pleasure, but they're also willing to run over people to get whatever they want. And I think I think arrogance is a really good way of thinking about that. I think it's a fine translation. I think overbearing is a fine translation. You do you. And you think about how, at least within the scriptural narrative, arrogance always ends badly for people. It never goes well. So, like, think about the Apostle Peter. There are at least two great stories where Peter is arrogant and he just ends up looking like a fool. One of those stories I was thinking about comes in Matthew 16. This is where Jesus says he's going to be crucified. And then he's going to, rise up. And there's a whole resurrection thing. And Peter goes to him and he says, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." And Jesus turns to Peter and he says, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are a hindrance to me. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." I mean, you got to think about it. Peter's got a lot of chutzpah right here to say to the Lord of creation, "No, you're wrong. That's not how this is going to work." And so Jesus, he confronts him on it. He says, "No, you're the one who's wrong. You are acting like Satan. You are being my adversary. And the reason you're being my adversary is because you have your heart set on the things of men, but I'm living for the things of God." And that's a really great way of thinking about what arrogance is. It's setting your heart on the things of men instead of setting them on the things of God. And arrogance, when you do that, when you care more about yourself than God, you end up hardening yourself, hardening your heart against other people. You stop seeing people as blessings and you see them as opposition. You stop seeing them as gifts and you see them as problems to be solved. We stop valuing others in our arrogance. We stop listening to other people in our arrogance. We close ourselves off. We isolate ourselves. That's what arrogance does. And so Paul does not need, Paul knows that Titus doesn't need arrogant people. He's battling arrogant people. Arrogant people don't listen. Arrogant people don't care about other people. Titus needs to find people who care. Because when you're in the ditch fighting, when you're battling it out, you have to keep your focus on who you're doing this for. Otherwise, you might fall, you might falter. And so not being arrogant is going to be a very important quality for not only shepherds, but for all of us to have. And so he says, don't be arrogant. And then he says, don't be quick-tempered. Don't be somebody whose fuse is short and then they explode. But maybe you know somebody like this. There are a few people in my life, I'm not naming names, that every time they enter a room and I am in that room, my spidey senses start tingling. Like I perk up a little bit, and I become very aware of where they are in that room and how much I'm going to have to interact with them. Because, not that I don't love them, but I know that I'm going to have to walk on eggshells with them. I'm going to have to be very careful with what I say, with what I talk about, because I know that in just a heartbeat, they can explode. Similar to like the Animaniacs cartoon, Katie Kaboom. If you don't know what that is, you should go onto the YouTubes and type in Katie Kaboom. Hilarious cartoons. But there are these people that they just get angry and they lose control. That I think there are certainly times where anger is appropriate, but in their anger, they're looking to hurt people. They're looking to smash through people. In their anger, they're stifling connection. They're stifling growth. They're stifling communities. Because like as I said, either we don't want to be around them and we avoid them, or when we are around them, we kind of play nice and let them have their way because we just don't have time for the drama, right? Like ain't nobody got time for that. And it seems like some people, they just get drawn into that and they just suck you into that heated anger. And you're just like, man, I do not have time for this. This is not a healthy way to live. Okay, so don't be arrogant, don't be quick-tempered, and don't be given to too much wine. Okay, I am not a person that says one drunk kind of people. I think, Paul drank wine. Paul advises Timothy to drink wine. There are some who would argue that, well, it's grape juice, and like that's not a thing. That's, if someone says that to you, just go, nah, bro, as Andrew Gordon would do. But drunkenness is not just a Christian vice. I think in a lot of cultures, it's seen as a negative because it shows a lack of self-control. It can show an inability to deny pleasure or an overability to engage pleasure, to gorge yourself. I think it's important to note that, we are not our best selves when we are drunk. It confuses our mind. Some of us become really angry when we get drunk, and so people don't want to be around us. Some of us, this is me, right? So I've been drunk 3 times in my life, I think. Yeah. I don't drink a lot. And the reason that I don't drink a lot is because I'm what people call a lightweight. And I don't want to be drunk. I don't enjoy myself when I'm drunk. I certainly don't enjoy the after effects of being drunk. That's just not something I'm going to get into. I know that I'm loud, more loud than normal. I know that I'm more obnoxious than normal. I know that in those moments, I think I'm hysterical and nobody else does. And it can lead to some very embarrassing moments. So because of that, I avoid alcohol as much as possible. Every now and then, maybe, but it's not something I do on the regular. And it's because I'm quick to get into that drunkenness and I'm quick to lose control, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to move into foolish patterns of living, and you don't want your leaders to live into foolish patterns of living, because honestly, sometimes we use alcohol as a way of medicating. And if you're stressed and you're tired, and if you're in Crete and you're dealing with false teachers and you've got a lot of alcohol, it's just not going to go well for you. Also, I just want to say, for everyone who's under 21, who's listening to this, or who will be talking, it's illegal. Don't do it. But also remember that your brains are already wired for making bad choices. They don't need any help. So just stay away. Just don't do it. It'll go better for you, I promise. So Paul's ultimate point is he's wanting shepherds to be self-controlled, to be self-controlled leaders. And I think maturity is certainly marked by being a self-controlled person and learning to find that balance in things that give us pleasure and not overdoing it. The last thing that he looks at is not being violent. Violence and drunkenness are oftentimes connected in the ancient world, that one can lead to the other. You know, we've met those people, right? I have friends who I would qualify as angry drunks. Excuse me. And they're not fun to be around with, and they're at a high risk of getting involved in fights, and it becomes a whole thing. And then you definitely don't want that happening when you have someone who's in leadership. But I think there's a more broadness to this word. It's not just about someone who shoves and pushes and fights people, though that is certainly a part of it. It can also refer to people who are bullies, people who are verbally abusive, anyone who is finding a way to forcibly put others down. It seems to be kind of the flavor of this word, that they are lifting themselves up, putting others down. Might be a modern way of thinking about it today. And you just don't want that. You don't want that in your leaders, because leaders are meant to help us thrive. And personally, I don't want that in my life. Like, I know when I'm my best self is when I'm celebrating with others, not comparing or critiquing others. When I can look at somebody and say, man, what they're doing is great, and I'm so encouraged by that. Like, that's a better way to live. And I can spur them on. I can say, I love that you got to go on this adventure, or I love that you wrote this book, or I love that you said that, or I love that you handled this situation, or et cetera, et cetera. I love your kids. I think as a parent, we got to do a really good job of encouraging other parents and not comparing our parenting styles, not comparing our kids. Like, that's just an unhealthy way to live. Like, be encouraging. Don't be someone who puts people down. So that's kind of the negative qualities that Paul is talking about. And next week we'll look at some more healthy habits, some more healthy qualities for their character. But I want to think a little bit about that mirror again, right? Like, we're holding up that mirror to look at ourselves and say, where am I tracking? How am I walking? And maybe as you look at this list, as you think about these stories that Paul is sharing and this conversation happening, maybe you might start to feel like, oh, maybe I am a little bit more given to wine than I wish I was. Maybe I am violent, which, if you're violent, seek therapy. Maybe I'm more arrogant. Maybe I'm more quick-tempered than I wish. If that's true, just a couple of thoughts for you as you start the journey of discovering healthy habits. Number one, I think it's important to identify the source. Go deeper than just, I'm a sinner. Yeah, we're all sinners, but sin manifests itself differently in each of us. So I think it's important for us to explore in our own hearts, like, why are we arrogant? Why do I look at myself only and first and think of myself as superior to others? And sometimes I think we can be arrogant because we genuinely believe that we are the best thing in the room, the best person, the best skilled, whatever. We genuinely believe in our inherent superiority to others. And if that's the reason, then dealing with that is different than some of us who look arrogant and act arrogantly and act pridefully, but that's really born out of our own insecurities. That the reason we're unable to celebrate people's successes is because it becomes a reflection of our own inadequacies. That the reason that we always have to have a say in everything is because we constantly think we have to look good. We have to fight to look good for people. And so understanding, like, where that comes from, like, why are you so quick-tempered? Understanding why you are the way you are, it might not fix everything. It certainly won't fix everything, but it can, I think, help us find on that journey to becoming more like Christ. And it's a discovery that is not looked to excuse your unhealthy habits, right? It's just trying to explain them, to have a better understanding. Maybe you were raised a certain way. Maybe you had unspoken rules in your household that dictated how you are to respond to people. And you saw that modeled through your parents, or maybe you saw that in school. Maybe you have mishandled or not handled yet trauma in your life that is seeping through the cracks of your soul. And I would encourage everyone who is looking for the sources, who's trying to go deeper than just I'm a sinner. I would encourage you to find a counselor, to find trusted friends who you can talk with, who you can share with, who can help you, particularly if it relates to things like trauma. Finding well accredited helpers in that area is so very, very important. And I'll say this, that if you find yourself on the other end of someone who is abusive, if you have someone in your life and you think that they are violent and they're being violent towards you, please get out of that relationship as soon as possible. It is not Christ-like to weather that storm. It is, I think, Christ-like to help them find the help they need, and you get yourself in a place where you're safe and protected. So if there are violence, if there's abuse in your life, and you need help with that, if you need help getting out of that, please let somebody at our church know. Please let one of our ministers or elders know, so that we can help you find healing and hope. So identify your sources, and as a part of that, I invite you to be ridiculously honest with yourself and with God. That even in order to identify our sources, we have to be willing to own our baggage, to own what we are really like. I was thinking about weeds this week, not the show, the plant. And I remember when I was a kid, that was one of my chores that I have distinct memories of going out, and we had this, it wasn't a flower bed because that would imply flowers, but it was this barky bush area in front of my bedroom. And so there were a couple of times where I would go out there and I would have to pull weeds, and they were long and their roots were deep. And I, honestly, looking back on it now, I think it's one of those tedious jobs that parents give to kids to get them out of the way, not because it actually solves anything, but because they need their children to do something. I'm not saying that's what my mom and dad did, but I'm onto your game now. I'm aware of what you did, Mom and Dad. And that's fine. I'm probably going to do it to Isaac. And here's the thing about weeds that I was thinking about, is that weeds don't need work to grow, right? Like, they don't sell special weed growth fertilizer. They're not, here 10 tips for getting your weeds to be as weedy as possible. Weeds grow on their own. They don't need any help. If anything, they take more work to get rid of. That you have to actually make a concerted effort to remove your weeds. And unhealthy habits are like weeds, that you don't need to do any work for unhealthy habits and patterns to appear in your life. That will just happen. One day you will crack open a can of Mountain Dew at the age of 11, and sooner or later you'll find yourself at 34 realizing that that's all you ever drink, hypothetically speaking. No work is involved in developing bad habits. But in developing good habits, you have to do some work. And one thing I've noticed about myself is how good I am at lying to me, and how good humanity just is at justifying unhealthy choices that we make. You know, we might say that we're not overbearing or controlling. What we might say is, I just have really high standards. I just believe in quality. We might say we're not quick-tempered. We would say we're just really passionate and we feel strongly the things that we feel. Or that classic, I can stop whenever I want. I choose and I'm in control. Maybe none of that is true. Maybe you're not in control. More times than not, you might actually be less in control than you think you are. But we fool ourselves into believing that we can stop whenever we want, that our bad habits are actually really healthy habits. And so I think we need to be ridiculously honest with ourselves. And that can be really hard because truth sometimes hurts. It shatters our reality. I was thinking about the book of Ecclesiastes this week. It might be the best example of a biblical author being ridiculously honest, right? So Ecclesiastes is written by the teacher, and the teacher has come to the end of his life, and he's reflecting back on all of the things that he has done. And he is acknowledging that those ideas, those practices, those achievements that we might traditionally think of as having it made. Like when we check that box off, we're good to go. He acknowledges that actually all of those things turn out to be really empty. So he explores gaining wisdom, and he says that is like a mist that passes away. He explores having wealth, and he says that is like a mist passing away. Everything that he can think of that has value, it turns out that it's meaningless. And that leads him to this conclusion. He says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. You have to be ridiculously honest to come to that conclusion. You have to be just open to so much self-awareness to say, you know what, life is filled with things that fade away, and we forget that. And when it fades away, we think, well, we'll just replace it. And then it fades away and we'll just replace it. We get stuck in this cycle that leaves us feeling empty and always wanting more. And the teacher has lived all of that. He says, actually, here's the thing. When I'm really honest with myself, here's the thing that remains. It's God, and it's his commands. And that's going to take courage, and that's going to take faith. All of these things take courage and faith to look at yourself in the mirror, to be really honest with yourself, and to identify your unhealthy habits. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about this in some practical terms on the podcast this week, which we're still doing because, fun fact, Andrew and I haven't been in the same room to record a podcast in like a year and a half, so why change that now? But we will have a podcast this week, and we'll try to explore some other ways that we can be tangible with these ideas. But I want to end by just encouraging you to look in the mirror this week. And you may not like what you see, but keep looking. Because even if you don't like what you see, I think it's important to remember that God sees you. He sees all of you, the good and the bad, and he still loves you. He still is calling you to him. He still moves so that we can move to be near him. God sent his son to redeem us. Or what Paul will later say to Titus is that we ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to various passions and pleasures, passing our days in malice and envy, hated by others and hating one another. But when the goodness and the loving kindness of God our Savior appeared, he saved us, not because of works done by us in righteousness, but according to his own mercy, by the washing of regeneration and renewal of the Holy Spirit, whom he poured out on us richly through Jesus Christ our Savior, so that being justified by his grace, we might become heirs according to the hope of eternal life. You have redemption. Looking in this mirror for Christians, it's not about earning something or proving yourself. It's about recognizing the gifts that you already have, and about letting go of the things that are holding you back, the things that Christ redeemed you from. So walk in redemption this week. Live into the gospel that one time we were filled with hate and pain and brokenness, and now we've been healed and made whole, and we are journeying in wholeness together. And that's my prayer for you this week, that you journey in wholeness, that you are moved in whatever ways we can be moved towards one another in this very weird time, that you are moved towards one another, that you are moved closer to God as you find wholeness through Christ Jesus our Lord, and that you steward well for his glory, for the healing of our community. Thank you very much for watching. We will be giving out more information for all the different things we're going to do throughout the week to stay connected, to be encouraging to each other, and you are all in my prayers. God bless. Have a wonderful week.